Hello, how are you doing today? I hope you're doing well. So, today in biology, I want us to talk about the nervous system. So, this nervous system is simply a system of coordination in animals, and it is made up of the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves. So, whenever we deal with the brain and the spinal cord, these two makes up the central nervous system. While when we talk about the nerves, for example, those nerves in our brachial plexus, like the radial nerve, the median nerve, the ulnar nerve, all these makes up the peripheral nervous system, including this intercostal nerve, which makes up your thorax cavity, and the sacral plexus, the digital nerve in your digital forearm, there in your digit fingers. We have the superficial peroneal nerve, which is here. We have the common peroneal nerve. All these nerves, whenever we talk about the nerves, we are talking about the peripheral nervous system. Now, in the central nervous system, we need to understand to say the nervous messages are transmitted in form of electrical impulses. So these electrical impulses are also known as nerve impulses. Now let's move on to neurons. We have three basic neurons in our central nervous system. So these neurons are simply basic functional units of the nervous system. So we have three major neurons. Number one, we have the sensory neuron. Number two, we have the relay neuron. Number three, we have the motor neuron. So this relay neuron can also be known as the connector. It can also be known as the intermediate neuron, or the multipolar neuron, or the pyramidal neuron. All right. So talking a little bit about the three basic neurons that we have mentioned, we have the sensory neuron that we can see here on the middle. We can see our receptor cell. We can see the structure of the dendrite. We can see the structure of the myelin sheath, and we can see our long structure of the axon. And whenever we talk about this sensory neuron, it also has the cell body outside of the central nervous system. Now remember, we said the central nervous system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. So whenever you are drawing your structure of the sensory neuron, the cell body has to be outside of the central nervous system. Now, what is the function of this sensory neuron? The sensory neuron carries nerve messages in form of electrical impulses from the sensory receptor to the central nervous system. So this neuron carries electrical impulses from the skin to the central nervous system. That is the simplest definition that you can give. While when we talk about the motor neuron, this one is carrying nerve messages, or it's carrying electrical impulses from the central nervous system. What did we say makes up the central nervous system? The brain and the spinal cord. So this one is carrying the electrical impulses from the brain to the effectors. So the effectors are also known as the muscles, right? So this one carries nerve messages from the central nervous system to the effectors, while the interneuron, which is also known as the connector neuron or the relay neuron, simply acts as a connector between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. Okay, talking a little bit about this motor neuron, we are able to see that the cell body is located inside the central nervous system. They can ask you to distinguish or differentiate between the two neurons, the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. So your key features in your definition is, you first of all talk about the functions of the two neurons, where we said this motor neuron carries electrical impulses from the central nervous system, the brain, to the effectors, which are the muscles. And when we talk about the muscles, we have the triceps, and we also have the biceps. So this major neuron, which is the motor neuron, also has the cell body outside of the central nervous system. And when we talk about the sensory neuron, we say this one carries electrical impulses from the sensory receptor. An example of your sensory receptor can be your skin. It is the one which is converting that message in form of an electrical impulse. Once it's formed into an electrical impulse, then it can be taken to the brain for interpretation. Once the brain interprets, then the message will be sent through this relay neuron to the motor neuron, which is simply going to cause the muscles either to contract or to relax in order to react to your stimulus. So that contraction and relaxation between the two muscles is what we call the antagonistic action. All right, what are some of the key features we need to appreciate about the sensory neuron? Number one, we say these sensory neurons carries impulses from sensory organs to the central nervous system, the brain. Apart from that, they also have long dendrons and short axons. Apart from that, their cell bodies are not terminally located but are axillary. So here is our cell body, which is not terminally located, or you can simply say it's found outside of the central nervous system. And then we have a short axon and it has a long dendron. And then we have our sensory receptor there, which is receiving the message. And we said the sensory receptor, the example can be your skin, right? Moving on to another neuron, we have the motor neuron. So this motor neuron, we said it carries nerve messages or nerve impulses from the central nervous system to the effectors. And an effector is any part of the body that carries out a response to a nervous impulse. Most of the receptors, or most of the effectors rather, are the glands or the body organs such as the muscles. Now moving on to what characteristics the motor neurons have. Number one is that they carry impulses from the central nervous system to the effectors. And in the central nervous system, we discussed to say we have the brain, right? So I keep on emphasizing that point. I want you to get it, all right? And then apart from that, another characteristic that the motor neuron have is that they have long axons and short dendrites, which is quite the opposite with the sensory neuron. We said in the sensory neuron, the sensory neurons have short axons and long dendrites. All right, let's now talk about their cell bodies. So the cell bodies are terminally located, all right, or located at the end. When we talk about being located at the end, we are simply saying these are their cell bodies are found inside the central nervous system. All right, so here is your simple structure drawing that you can make. So you draw and indicate to say your cell body is located at the end, and then we have this long axon, and then we have the myelin sheath, the structure which is outside. We have the synaptic knob, we have the nodes of Ranvier. So these axons, they simply help to accelerate the speed at which the electrical impulses are moving. The myelin sheath, together with the nodes of Ranvier, these are simply coordinating together and helping the electrical impulse not to be lost along the way. All right, having said that about the motor neuron, let's now talk about the interneuron, which is also known as the relay neuron. So this relay neuron is simply a neuron that forms a link, right? We said it forms that link between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. All right, so these are located in the central nervous system and are multipolar so that they can provide alternative paths for electrical impulses. Good. Now let's talk about the space between the two neurons. So usually when electrical impulses have to move between the two neurons, right? So there is that space. So for example, when a nerve message is coming, it's going to meet a tiny space between the two neurons. So that tiny space between the two neurons is known as the synapse. So now how are the electrical messages going to pass through that synapse? So they are going to cross through the synapse through special structures that we call neurotransmitters. So examples of neurotransmitters that we have acetylcholine. So that acetylcholine is an example of the neurotransmitter. So the gap between the two neurons is known as the synapse. And how are the electrical impulses going to move through that synapse? They are going to use special features or neurotransmitters. That examples that we gave is acetylcholine choline in order for the nerve messages to be able to pass. Now let me make another video where I'll describe